Hi, I'm Scott Tansley. I'm a consulting architect and I work for GeoWorks in Wellington. The NZEUG User Group Committee recently reached out to me and asked if I'd give a presentation, bit of a thought piece maybe. But as we were talking about what that topic may be, we talked about one of my interests. I'll talk about this more shortly, which is mentoring and helping people in their careers. And the committee really felt that that could be something quite valuable to bring out and have a discussion, and something that probably doesn't get discussed in this sort of forum very often. So my main career is enterprise GIS, the big GIS basically. I'll talk about how I got there shortly. A thing that I'm really passionate about though is seeing people grow in their careers. A lot of the clients that I work with, I've seen them really take off in their interest in enterprise GIS and start to ask more and more questions and to grow within their capabilities. And there's multiple avenues as well. Not everything's about enterprise GIS. So it's nice to sort of work with people and understand what their strengths and weaknesses are and try and help them find the right avenue for them and to identify opportunities for them to grow into. So in terms of how my career has evolved, I came to GIS a little bit later than maybe some people. Essentially, I finished school at 18. Thank heavens for career teachers. They told me to go into banking. I hated it. It was horrible. It really wasn't the sort of thing that I wanted to do. I think I wanted quite a bit of adventure at that point in my life, and I became a reservist in the British Army. I was working in the Royal Engineers, which has got multiple skill sets and they do lots and lots of different things. But one of the branches that I noted was an ability to become a military surveyor, cartographer, and work within a geographic specialism. That was something that really intrigued me and I wanted to do. I applied to become full-time and go in as a regular soldier. I was encouraged to become an officer, and basically they said, you need to go to university, Scott. I took their advice, went, multiple reasons, and never went back to the British Army. But whilst I was at university, I needed part-time work and worked in service organisations, as you can see here. After graduation, I went to Nottingham City Council. My degree, by the way, was in geography, physical geography. Nottingham City Council, worked in administration for a while, nothing geographic about that. Then went into an education department and was working as a project manager in what we call school reorganisation. I'll talk more about that in a moment. But while I was there, the education department spotted my degree in geography and they already knew that I was massively interested in IT. So the director called me into his office one day and just said, "Hey Scott, have you heard of GIS?" I said, "Geographic Information Systems? Yeah, I studied it a little bit at university." "Great, you're on a course." And the following Monday, I started to learn Esri. The reason I brought the above up is because I want to say that all of those skills, even the banking and things that I learned in banking, they still help me now as running a small business like GeoWorks. Nothing is lost and everything has been really, really helpful. And I know some of us come into GIS a little bit later, like I did, and some of us come in early. We've all got different pathways and the skills and characteristics that we learn in each of them. And we shouldn't ever consider that they are not going to help us move forward. So in banking and in Hertz and British Midlands, I learned customer service. And as a consultant, if I'm not giving good customer service, then basically I shouldn't be doing what I'm doing. So in terms of my own career, I said I started as a GIS analyst. School reorganisation was around, we had 14,000 teenagers, secondary school age kids in Nottingham City. We had 19,000 school places. So we were only filling our schools at 75% capacity, thereabouts. We needed to streamline that. We needed to take old schools and make them new. We needed to relocate them, get them in the right place, minimise home to school journeys and all of those things. And GIS was absolutely the best tool for us. So I had data and I started using GIS. And everything was data analytics at that point. I saw a job in central government and I really wanted to focus more on the GIS than the project management. because GIS in that first role was probably only about 30% of what I did, and I wanted to get closer to 100%. I moved into central government, like I say, into the Coal Authority, which was to do with the management of the legacy of coal mining. It wasn't to do with extraction. It was environmental management. It was LIM reports relating to how houses, how safe they were, effectively, whether they were literally likely to fall down a hole or have issues with gas or subsidence or other characteristics of the legacy of coal mining. And we used GIS to manage, report, and analyse on all of that. Initially, my job was in data capture, but I started to ask questions, and my managers saw a spark, and they pursued those sparks. And I went from GIS analyst, data capture technician, and they trained me to be a GIS developer, firstly in desktop, as we see here. Of course, everything was ArcMap in that day and age. They brought me up to be a DBA working with SQL Server and ArcGIS enterprise geodatabases, as we call them now. ArcGIS Server was released while I was in central government, and I was one of the first government agencies in the UK to implement that. And Esri UK were intrigued by some of the work that I was doing and the skills that I were acquiring. They asked me to speak at a conference, and then had a quiet word and said, "Hey Scott, will you come and join us?" And I worked in pre-sales for 3 years, mainly looking after local government and central government, but also partners and alliances like IBM, Microsoft, SAS or SAS, on the business intelligence side of things. And that really opened my eyes to integration. So during that time, I was working as a consultant on the pre-sales side, and in 2011 I was lucky enough to be able to move with my family over to New Zealand, and I came here as a developer. So most of the work that I was doing, yes, it was architecture and bits and bobs, but it was mainly on the GIS developer side of architecture. As I moved here, I was working for Explorer Graphics, which rapidly became North South GIS. And although I came as a developer, they'd recruited some in the time that I was going through the migration process. And I ended up working in infrastructure as a service and cloud, and more around how we deploy our GIS server technologies rather than how we develop against it. I basically went to work for Stats New Zealand. I'd been doing some consultancy with them, and they asked if I could go and help launch their ArcGIS enterprise and their enterprise activities, server-side activities and things like that. I was picked up quite rapidly by eSpatial, and they asked me to go in as an Esri practice manager and help them with the Esri work that they were doing. And whilst I was there, I was mainly working with central government clients. ArcGIS Enterprise became a product at that point, and I started to architect mainly within the infrastructure as a service area. Eagle approached me and said, "Hey, look, you're highly technical. We need people with technical skills." And I had, I think it was about 3.5 really good years with Eagle Technology. Initially as a technical advisor and then as a solution architect there. But I've been doing that for quite some time in different ways, as I've said, and I needed to stretch myself and see where I could go. And so I launched GeoWorks, and that's rounded out the consultancy, architecture, infrastructure as a service, DBA side of things. And that's really where I am now. But one of the things that has underpinned a lot of this has been education, and it's something that I recommend. Obviously the bachelor's physical geography, I did a master's in GI science through distance learning. And more recently I've been working on my Esri certifications, and we'll talk about that more shortly. The biggest thing, and I think you've already picked up on this for me, was mentoring. Whilst I was at the Coal Authority, I had some mentors who kept pulling me and stretching me and encouraging me and showing me where I'd made little mistakes and how I could improve on those mistakes. And since I've come to New Zealand, I've more and more provided mentoring and identified people, worked with Victoria University, and basically tried to help people in their careers. So one of the things that I think is fundamental in people being able to drive their careers forward is getting certification. And for me, that looks like the orange certificates from Esri. And there are many, many certificates. Okay, some of them will be in desktop or data management or whatever. Some of them will be more specialist. So, you might become a JavaScript developer or a Python developer. You might work in utilities, for example, ArcGIS Online administration. So we can see here that I've got the orange ones. A lot of people are getting the blue ones or the purple ones. They are really important in telling your story, where you are, what level of the certificate you've got is fundamentally important. In New Zealand, there are only 69 of us that have got these. And when I look at this, the top three, three of the top four there are all at Eagle. And really, my belief is that we should have more people with these certifications as well. It's a way of, if you wanted to join GeoWorks, for example, in the future, I would be looking to see, have you either got these certificates or the potential for it? And I know I was really encouraged when I joined Eagle to get those orange certificates. And there was a real sense of achievement when I got it. It proved that I knew what I knew. They are tough exams, but they are really, really worth doing. If that's not your thing, I fully understand. There are other avenues to explore, becoming GISP or a chartered geographer through the Royal Geographical Society. And that was something that Esri UK were really behind, and the Coal Authority. And for a while I was a chartered geographer, but I just became more and more technical, and it didn't feel as if it fitted where I was going. So how our industry can affect our career. So at Esri UK, we used to talk about 6 domains. It's mainly how we position the business, but local government, central government, defence and intelligence, emergency services, utilities, commercial. And that could be anything. It could be banking, it could be insurance, almost anywhere. And as we've all seen over the last few years, GIS has become more and more pervasive and fits into more. And in all honesty, there's probably far more categories than that that we could subdivide. But one of the things that I've noticed is if you work in local government, you're expected to know everything. And some of the people that I'm working with in local government, they're probably stretched a little bit too thin. They've got to know desktop, they've got to know data, they've got to know mobile, they've got to know ArcGIS Online, they've got to know ArcGIS Enterprise, they've got to know the database, they've got to know Python and JavaScript. And it's like, I've been there. And that is a really hard place to be, and full respect to the people that are doing those things. Central government is different from one organisation to another or one agency to another, but sometimes people get siloed and put right down into a box, and there isn't the opportunity to grow and expand. Utilities, I largely stayed away from this simply because you've got to know the assets. It's not just about knowing the data and the GIS. You've fundamentally got to know the business and have people who can help you in that. Another thing that really impacts our ability to go forward in our GIS careers is the size of the employer. The very first organisation I met was Carterton District Council. And that was when I came over for my interview before I even moved here. And some of the guys there, it was probably 25% of their role. They hardly did GIS, but they were passionate about what they did. And as we move to big cities, we see many people, many skill sets, many teams. So there's a very big difference. So even within local government, all of this impacts our ability to learn. So how does the evolution of technology affect our careers? Well, if I look 10 years ago, it was actually quite simple. We had desktop GIS and data, and for a lot of us, that's still our bread and butter. We had a server. Very often that server would be inside because security wasn't very good, to be quite honest. And if we did need to do something outside, we'd have a second environment of server. And that was so we could keep the private things inside and allow public things to go outside, for example. We didn't have ArcGIS Online. I've left it in this slide, but it's grayed out. Those things just didn't exist. What it meant was we needed developers. So very often we would see analysts and senior analysts within a team and GIS manager. A developer might sit inside the team or might sit outside. And obviously consultants would come from outside and help us. But that consultancy has changed. When I started my consultancy career, it was about helping people do GIS. Now the type of consultancy I provide is more architectural, it's far more technical, and it's more IT centric, and we'll explore this shortly. Senior analysts, the pathway originally was very linear up to GIS manager. Now there are so many people doing GIS, it's brilliant, but not everybody can be a GIS manager. We've got to consider other ways, and obviously that's what this presentation is all about. Also, 10 years ago, we had project managers and consultancies running big projects. Architects were involved, there were clients, obviously, as the customer. Business analysts and developers would be taking this forward. They were big projects with lots of dollars. And a paradigm shift has happened, and we know this. Now, some of us will be working towards having ArcGIS Online and ArcGIS Enterprise, and we can come at that from either angle depending where we started and the size of our organization and all of those things. The outside server has gone. We've matured. We used to only think about web maps and portals and story maps and things like that, but now we're talking about artificial intelligence, system of systems, Internet of Things, integration, digital transformation and operational intelligence. We're talking about systems of systems, supporting the needs of an entire workforce, engagement, insights, records, all of these things are fundamental to what we do. And when we go to conferences, it looks easy. We work in a world of configuration before development. That picture there is a little bit out of date, some of those things have gone, but it still tells the story that I want to say. We don't develop anywhere near as much. So what we have seen through these conferences and through the way that the technology is evolved and the way that we get excited about GIS is it's become easy. We don't just say to a developer, can you do this? As an analyst, we can very often do these things ourselves, but there are challenges. If we're going to be using these server technologies, do we go cloud or infrastructure as a service? We need to think about civil defense, high availability, disaster recovery. Where should my data be? Where should my desktop be? Why is my GIS so slow? The previous 2 bullet points. Is my system secure? What about privacy? Is my data capture following robust processes? What about archiving? Do we self-administer our GIS or do we get a service contract? What about Kubernetes? There are all of these buzzwords that come out of the reality of owning and operating an enterprise GIS. And where do each of those fit? Well, this is where we were 10 years ago, and these were the roles that we talked about. But now, without trying to upset anybody, New Zealand's got lots of great GIS people. There's some fantastic stories out there of what people are doing and achieving. But very often, and this is where I don't want to upset people, we've got people that are technical enthusiasts rather than technical professionals. They think they know why things are happening, but not always. Okay, we need people that understands the impact of IT on GIS and GIS on IT. And this is a place where I think we're really, really lacking. If we keep adding more and more to our GIS, it just overloads it. We often don't understand true data management processes. We follow policies that our IT department has set that doesn't optimize or work in an optimal way for GIS workflows. And very often we're not thinking about data retention or the integrity of our data and information management. There's a lot of thought that can be put into these places and specialisms within GIS that I feel just aren't there, but the people are needed. So we can still look and see the same buzzwords of GIS consultants and GIS analysts. Sorry, the word thing here cut off the S for some reason. We still see senior analysts and business analysts and these things. But for me, some of the things that are missing within the GIS community are people who can also consult in information management or privacy. We see a total lack of spatial system administrators and security specialists and spatial architects. It's one of the places where we really, really need to grow people, and one of the things that I'm really passionate about doing. So the biggest issue in GIS today for me is that there really isn't a bridge between IT and GIS teams. they very often speak different languages, and we really need to bring this into focus. We need to get that bridge sharp. We need to allow people to be able to come up from within the GIS community and be exposed to cloud courses or data management courses or SQL Server or whatever it is, and become specialists in an area, and then be able to speak to these other professions within the IT community. And that is one of the places where I most often get called in to help and help be a bridge between those two communities. So mentoring, this is something that I've been passionate about. And I just want to put 3 special guys up. This is Phil and the 2 Steves. I work with all of them at the Coal Authority. I would not be where I am in my career if these guys hadn't have seen a spark and some potential and pulled me forward. And that's what I'm trying to do now, either amongst my customers or the team that I'm building in GeoWorks, is trying to lift people up and help them move forwards. And it's what I'm passionate about. And what I would encourage each of you is, don't be proud. Don't think that you've got all the answers. Reach out and find yourself a mentor. You know, that could be somebody that you work with, or somebody that you respect and aspire to being within the community. That could be New Zealand or wider. Better still, be a mentor. Even if you're junior, you can still mentor the interns coming up. Take a responsibility for it. Teach people what you know, and that's something that I'm trying to embed within my team here. But mentoring and accountability and striving to grow, they are the things that I think are absolutely most fundamental and required in New Zealand. Thank you.